Welcome to Keeping the World Company on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today, we'll talk about the results and implications of the elections in Germany. How concerned should we be? Our guests for the show are Gene Rosenfeld, independent scholar, and Manfred Henningsen, emeritus professor of political philosophy, UH Manoa. Welcome to both of you to the show. Gene, let me start with you. The elections in Germany are hotly contested, and they are important to the future of Germany and Europe. So we need to understand what has happened in the elections in Germany a few days ago and how the results will affect the future of Germany and Europe and the relationship of Germany and Europe with other countries, especially including the United States. So, Gene, what happened and why did it happen? I know that's a mouthful. See if you can help me with that.
Well, I needed some help with that too. So I spoke to my son, who has been living in East Germany in a small college town near Chemnitz for 5 years. And he speaks fluent German. He's teaching English and he stays abreast of things. And what he was telling me was a little bit troubling because I was there also last October and spoke to some people my age that he knew quite well. And they themselves sound all like they were center voters, that they voted CDU or even possibly center left. But people are becoming disenchanted and discouraged. They feel that for the last 3 years, the Christian Democratic Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, has not made good for them on the promises. You know, Eastern Europe is sort of the stepchild of Germany. It's much less economically sound. And the people there are concerned. They're uncertain about their economic futures. What they want is they want to control the immigration, much as people here do. They want, they're receptive to the alternative for Germany, which is the extreme right. Their argument and their message that all of the immigrants that came in during Chancellor Merkel's time, many of those are now undesirables and they should leave. And they would like to have a gold standard of immigrants who can perform high-tech jobs and things like that, very similar to here. But they're worried that even though they don't know very many immigrants, they're worried they're going to come and affect their economic position. So that's one thing. There is a bill that Merz and AFD are working on to bring that to fruition, to actually deport some of the immigrants. So that's one thing. The other thing is that Stolz has not been a very charismatic leader. He has not excited people. People were enthusiastic initially to help Ukraine, my son said, but now that's kind of wearing off too. And people are becoming much more concerned about consolidating their own positions economically, socially. They want Germany for Germans. They want, they're very patriotic in that regard. They want traditional values, just as people here often do in the rural areas. They want to wait and see if this new chancellor, Merz, can put a government together and respond to them, listen to them, because they don't feel listened to. And of course, the AfD has a lot more support in Eastern Germany than it does in the West. And still, 80% of the voters in Germany are not for the extreme right. But this is a situation in which the right wing can come from a minority position pretty fast and can succeed, much as did MAGA did here.
How much influence has J.D. Vance and Elon Musk, and for that matter, Trump, and for that matter, Russia and Putin have? How much influence have they had on this election and on the thinking of your son and his friends?
He doesn't really feel they had much impact at all. But what he told me about the AfD and what they stand for, it sounds right in sync with MAGA and Musk and Trump. And I think, too, we have to understand that in the larger context, if you pan back the camera, you see that these right-wing parties are strengthening in democracies in Europe, as well as in the United States, and to some extent, Canada as well, and Australia, by the way. So there seems to be a global trend that both the U.S. MAGA movement and the AfD in Germany and the National Front in France and other such parties are on the rise. And they're very, very appealing to younger people who feel more left out of the economic picture. People want homeland. They want a sense of returning to their own identity as a nation. And this is even stronger in Europe because each country has started out much more homogeneous than the United States, which we used to say was a nation of immigrants.
I can understand why Russia would want to be an intervener in German politics and German public opinion. But he wants them to agree with him about Ukraine. But I don't understand. Maybe you can help me understand why Trump and Musk and Vance are out there trying to affect public opinion in Germany, especially with the AfD. Is there a good reason for them to do this? What motivates them?
Like gravitates to like, especially politically. There was an alliance of democracies. The United States president used to describe himself as the leader of the free world. Today, Trump denied that title. He does not want to be described as the leader of the free world. But I believe that he wants to extend his movement and what it stands for, MAGA, throughout the countries in Europe and to build other institutions, just like he's doing here. He is deconstructing the institutions of the last 80 years in the world, as well as the institutions here, and remaking them, replacing them with new personnel and a new agenda. And I think he finds in these right-wing parties in Europe, and to some extent in Russia too, that agenda, which I would broadly describe in scholarly and scientific terms as neo-fascist.
Manfred, it seems to me from what Jean said and what you've said before the show began, that Germany this is fluid. It's in political fluidity, and it can change. It is changing, and sometimes in remarkable ways. And I wonder, what kind of influences have made it change that way? Why has it become less stable and predictable as it was before?
I think you're right. German politics is at this point in a fluid state because we don't know whether the winner of the Christian Democratic Party, that's the party of Angela Merkel, will be able, Friedrich Merz is his name, will be able of forming a government with the Social Democrats. That's the party of Scholz. Now, there's a lot of resistance within the Social Democratic Party for having another grand coalition, because whenever they enter with the Christian Democrats into a coalition, they lose support among the voters. I mean, the Social Democratic Party is the oldest party in Europe, was created in 1863. It was always a left party, a working class party, but it has not succeeded, not only because Scholz was not a very charismatic leader, but because of its having lost this traditional constituency, the working class. The working classes in all Western countries have lost their identity. They are not as identifiable in the way they were before. So the fluidity has to do with these changing constituencies. One interesting thing about the election is that not only the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, did not reach levels that it has reached in France, but that you have a left party suddenly emerging again, strengthened. And some people say they will grow. Now, this left party goes back to the former regime party of the East German regime, but I think it has attracted a lot of young people And these young people are not only in East Germany, which is a part we can talk separately about a little bit later, but also in West Germany. Now, the AfD gained a lot of votes in East Germany because you have there this phenomenon, of being the loser of the unification in 1991. Well, I think it is a somewhat strange feeling that becomes politically articulated in the East, especially by older people and by young men. The young men, lost a lot of young women who went to the West. They didn't like to continue to live in the East. The older people were connected with the regime, they had positions in the regime, and they'd feel, that they lost this power that they had. So what you have there is a loser syndrome in the East, having lost as a result of the unification. And they, for some bizarre reason, they look to Russia, as now they were the occupying force in East Germany from 45 to 91. They look now to Russia, as a savior, which is bizarre. Now,
It is bizarre because after when the Russians came into Germany, they were brutal.
yes,
They were
but
cruel.
right. But look, they're also anti-American in the East, stronger than in the West. Now, as a result of Trump and Vance's interventions, this anti-Americanism is also emerging again stronger in the left in West Germany. And Trump's and Vance's intervention certainly helped this anti-Americanism to grow. So what I'm afraid of that Merz is unable to form a coalition with the Social Democrats because of his positions, or because the Social Democrats do not want to go along with him, and that you will get a stalemate, and this stalemate will lead then to a paralysis that the president will have to resolve either by forcing people to come together, but he has only limited power to do that, or to declare new elections. And then you will get a similar situation that you still have in Austria today. Has no government because of the difference between Austria and Germany is that the Austrians are much more right-wing than Germany is. Because the leading party in Austria is a right-wing party, the FPÖ. So we will have to wait and see what happens. And look, Germany is the strongest economic power.
Before we get to that, it seems to me you're painting a picture of fragmentation and divisiveness, where people aren't agreeing with each other, and you do, like in Austria, maybe Germany goes through paralysis. And I don't remember, and I'm just a very limited observer here, but I don't remember it being like that in the past. This sounds special. It sounds new. This sounds like what's happening in the US, fragmentation and divisiveness. Am I right? Is this the same kind of thing? Does it have the same gestalt?
Yes and no. Look, Germany's economy is lingering at this point in a kind of recession, but I don't think it will last. They will get out of that. And one big advantage Germany has over all of the other Western economies is that it has a very, very low deficit. Now that's constitutionally required, and they may have to change it because Germany, as well as the rest of Europe, realizes that with the withdrawal of the United States as a protective force in Europe, whether that will lead to the Americans destroying NATO or not is still up in the air. But they all know, and Germany especially, that they have to beef up their military expenditures. And that certainly will play a role in the discussion about forming the government, because the Social Democrats are not all that happy about that, to cut social expenditures and raise the budget for the military.
Well, this just sounds to me, and from what Gina said and you've said, that the economy is central in the shift, and the migrants are connected to the economy, and so it really all revolves around the money, how they're doing. But what I've heard, what I've read, is that the German car industry is in trouble. For one good reason is that they can't compete with the Chinese cars. The BYD car is all over Europe. And they can't sell so much there. And then you've got Trump doing a 25% tariff on German cars starting pretty soon. It used to be 2.5%. Now it's going to be 25%. So this very lush market in the U.S. is pretty much going to dry up between the German car companies. You have Audi, then you have BMW, you have Volkswagen. All these cars very popular in the U.S., especially in the U.S., and they're not going to be able to sell them. They're not selling them enough now. Instead, people in Europe are buying the BYD cars because they're cheaper and they're more high tech and so forth. So this has had a profound effect on the German economy. Now, you say you think it's going to come back. Why do you say you think it's going to come back? It sounds like it has taken a fatal blow because cars were the biggest export part of the economy.
I do not think it's a fatal blow to the German car, and they will recover from that. And they're already seeing signs of that. And the German economy is not simply cars. There are all kinds of other features, the chemical and all kinds of manufactured products. So one should not reduce it simply of the car.
Germany's economy, as various manufacturing sectors in the U.S., is dependent on importation of parts and collaboration with other manufacturing sectors elsewhere. So, for example, if you look at cars just for a moment, you find that a lot of the parts that go into German cars come from other countries in Europe, Italy, for example. I don't know about France, but Italy for sure. And so if you look at that industry and other industries in Germany, they have a direct connection with other countries in Europe. And therefore, Germany is kind of the, it's the leading country for the economy. And as it gets a cold, all of Europe sneezes, or whatever they say about that. It's the bird in the coal mine. And I think that if we see problems in Germany, even temporary ones, we're going to see that spread to other parts of Europe. So if you ask Europe to put more money into security, there's an economic problem all over Europe now, right?
Yes, but remember, when you're speaking about the German car industry, almost all major German car producers have factories in the United States and in Kentucky and Tennessee, and whatever happens to their products, whether they will become threatened by Trump policies, I think he will be confronted then with opposition in these red states. But there is another issue that, Jean touched upon it, and that has to do with the migration issue. Germany is today the country with, percentage-wise, a larger presence of asylum seekers than in the United States, and 17%. You have a lot of these migrants that came in 2015 when Angela Merkel was chancellor, and she kept German borders open. A lot of these 1 million Syrians have become German citizens, and they don't want to go back to Syria. They are doctors, they are engineers, they are all kinds of have all kinds of positions in Germany, and they are see, not in East Germany, but in West Germany, they are recognized for what they contribute. Now, that doesn't mean that you have not also some of these feelings that that Jean touched upon when she talked primarily about East Germany. But I think the resentment of immigrants in West Germany, which is the major part, more than 70% of Germany is in the West, is not as strong in the West as it in the East. So because in the West, Germans have been exposed to diversity since 1945.
Now we're talking about diversity. We're talking about DEI. We're talking
Yes.
about some people dumping on other people. And that's not a good thing culturally. Angela Merkel would be delighted to find these qualified migrants in West Germany, and she'd be sad to find that people in East Germany were not particularly, accepting of them. But that's a big problem, and that's just like the U.S., isn't it? What do you do about that? Because from a rational point of view, the migrants you're talking about are well qualified, and they actually help the German economy.
Oh, absolutely. They are not only well qualified, not all, but I mean, they become more qualified going to school in Germany, getting degrees there. But, Germans know if they want to retain the social economic level of wealth that they have now, they need 500,000 migrants per year for the next 10 years. These figures are not speculative. They are very, very rational expectations. And so Germany, in a way you could say Angela Merkel did not completely understand. Scholz did when he was mayor of Hamburg. He wrote a wonderful book about Germany having become the dreamland for immigrants and what has to be done in order to integrate them. But he did not, for some strange reason, he lost sight of what he accomplished as Lord Mayor of Hamburg when he became Chancellor. Now, Angela Merkel, I think, is, still think, did the right thing in 2015.
I do too. Let me tell you a short story. We had our studio in Pioneer Plaza for a long time, and that's kind of at the center of HPU, right?
Right.
So I was talking to a woman, a foreign student, on 4th Street Mall, and I asked her how she felt about what was going on in Europe. This is like 5 years ago, maybe more, and she was from Sweden, and she said she was unhappy with Sweden. She wanted Sweden to be more like Germany because Angela Merkel had the right idea. Angela
Right.
Merkel was completely accepting, and Sweden wasn't so accepting. And I found that very interesting. I'm not sure it exists today, but that's what we have. Let me go to Jean for a minute, Manfred. Jean, we're looking for the implications of all of this. And Manfred paints a picture of certain fragmentation and divisiveness and fluidity, of course. And troubling processes, troubling dynamics that are happening in Germany. And I think we can agree that Germany is the canary in the coal mine as to all of Western Europe, or at least the classical Western Europe members. And I'd like to know your thoughts about how this affects the EU, how it affects the larger economy of Europe, how it affects the reliability of NATO, how it affects the relationship of Germany with France, Macron, and Italy, and other countries that we have assumed are okay. Maybe they're not. Maybe this canary in the coal mine effect is actually having a corrosive effect on all of Europe, or Western Europe anyway. Your thoughts?
Well, it's very interesting. If you read the press, the American press, and major journalists on what is happening in Europe, there's an upside and a downside. The upside is, well, because Trump is withdrawing from Ukraine, partnering with the Kremlin, in some kind of a very quick resolution, which is not going to be quick, in Ukraine, that it really is right now going to depend on the major countries in Europe to come together to support Ukraine. Not only their own defense establishments, but it's pointed out by these individuals that together the countries, the European Union, is larger than the United States. It is as advanced or more advanced. It has the resources, and it can become a major player in a world of superpowers. And that if they do decide to support Ukraine, then Russia will not feel emboldened to thrust its power into the weaker states in Europe on its borders, including Poland and the Baltics. And so there's a hope there that Trump's withdrawal will stimulate the Europeans to come together and form a coalition that will do what the United States should be doing. That's their attitude.
Let me insert a point that came from our last American Issues show. James Carville, a Democratic commentator, said, we the Democrats, we want Trump to make it worse and worse and worse. We like to see him hit the bottom of the barrel and do all kinds of outrageous things, because that will bring the Democrats together. And I really have my concern about that. But you're talking about a similar process. We'd like to see them all under attack. We'd like to see the U.S. withdraw and not provide support or weapons or comfort for NATO countries, and so. And then only then will the Europeans see the message and get together. It's a parallel, isn't it? And I wonder if you think that would work.
It is a parallel. I do not agree with James Carville. I think he's very good on domestic politics. I'm not so sure he's so good on European politics or global politics. The problem, the downside that I was going to contrast that with, is the rising power of the right-wing movements in Europe appealing to cultural values, to homogeneity, to economic dynamism, bringing the money home to the people who feel left out, much as it is here. So there is a kind of almost parallel isolationism and patriotism, if you want to call it that, nationalism going on in Europe as well. But it hasn't dominated. It hasn't taken over yet. The question is, can it be redirected? Can it be assimilated? Or is it going to build and build and build? Because the perspective of the neo-fascists in the democracies of the world is that we are at a tipping point, politically, economically, financially, militarily, that we need new institutions. We're going to get rid of the old institutions. NATO is worn out. The UN is worn out on the global scene. And new coalitions and alliances need to be formed. The question is, are they going to be formed by the right-wing parties coming together, or are they going to be formed by a continuation of the traditional parties that are able to hold the line? Macron, for example, has become Europe's diplomat if Germany has become its leading business power. And the alliance between Germany and France is palpable. And Macron was just here talking to Trump. You recall that several years ago, he was in Russia talking to Putin, trying to mitigate some of the changes, the major and fast and what he considers to be destructive changes that are going on politically in the world. So the question is, are we at a tipping point for a new world order? What will that order look like? The United States and Europe, Germany in particular, seem to be in sync politically as to the direction they are going in, but Germany has perhaps not reached the tipping point that the United States has reached, and still is looking for solutions that it can, in essence, fend off a party that it regards as extremist, so extremist that it will not form a coalition government with that party, even when its numbers are increasing. That party, AfD, is going to have to win and be number one in order to take to govern. It can't be number two and form a coalition and govern.
Well, let me ask you about, this is a third party factor. Usually when you make trade deals and you're a member of the EU, you make them with the consent of the EU. And maybe this reflects that the EU is not as solid as it used to be, nor is NATO as solid as it used to be. So what happened recently is that Canada, which is looking at 25% tariff right in the nose, made a deal directly with Germany. And now there's a bilateral deal, not a multilateral deal, but a bilateral deal with just one member of the EU, namely Germany, who in previous times would not have done this, with another outside country, which is also a member of NATO and so forth. But that's a breakaway kind of deal. And it reflects the effect of the tariffs. It reflects this kind of countermeasure mentality where Trump does something, so we make a deal and exclude the United States. So query, what are we seeing in all of that in terms of, the trade, the relationships, the way these institutions, if you will, work in Europe?
Well, the answer to that question is that Germany will not follow this as a model. This was an exceptional relationship with Canada directed at Trump's threats. If Germany has any future intentions, they will be within the European Union. And maybe they will also move in the direction that Macron wanted the EU to move for a long, long time, namely develop a military part. So in a way, and Merz has already made some comments along those lines, and I found one of the most encouraging statements that came out of his mouth were his angry responses to Vance and Trump. And I'm sure Trump didn't like them, but he will not find in Merz, a guy who will simply sit there and let him talk as Merkel sometimes did, out of politeness or out of the realization you cannot publicly discuss with the bully. Merz, has a bully mentality himself, and it's very interesting, in her biography, in her memoirs, Merkel describes her conflict or constant contention with Merz very nicely when she describes it as two people who wanted power, and I won, period. And now Merz, the loser in this battle that has been going on in the Christian Democratic Party since 2002, is in the position where he always wanted to be. So we will see whether, he will come out as a macho politician or as a loser. I don't think he will be the loser, and I don't think he will abandon, the EU as the major focus of his international interests. He will not become a nationalist. And I think the other 27, the other 26 member states are looking for that. And so what we have now to wait to see what's happening in France, because remember, Macron will face the re-election he cannot be re-elected. He will have to leave in 2027. And he has no parliamentary support for the government that he tries to form.
That is a very important point.
Yes.
That soon enough there will be a change in leadership,
yes,
and a change in policy.
Right.
Policy in Germany and in France, through two very strong countries. And I'm worried about that change in policy, because I think that things are, as you said, fluid. So before the show began, Manfred, you said, just as we are living in very dangerous times here in the US, Europe is living in very dangerous times in Europe. Could you explain how that works?
Well, Europe, I think, is living in more dangerous times than the United States because, you have the threat at the doorsteps, with the imperialist Putin. And then you have within the European Union right-wing autocrats like Orban in Hungary and the guy in Slovakia, and you have these tensions very often in Serbia, in Romania, and in other parts. The only good sign is that Great Britain, has now a prime minister who has rediscovered his European identity. Now, whether that will actually lead to an attempt to rejoin the European Union, I don't know. I don't think it will happen soon. But in any case, in terms of cooperation, I think the cooperation between the UK, the United Kingdom, and the European Union is growing. And it's growing also with regard to the support for the Ukraine. And Mats, has said, he will be supporting the Ukraine militarily and money-wise.
So you say that, and those sound like empty words. I'll tell you why. Because Trump has excluded all the European countries, all the EU countries, all the NATO countries from these, quote, and it's euphemistic, peace negotiations that he is conducting by himself, even without Zelensky. And so, they can say, oh, yeah, we'll support Ukraine. But what's happening now excludes them. They have no seat at the table. Will they really support? Are they really capable of supporting Ukraine when Trump is sucking out all the oxygen?
Yes, they will. I mean, politically, militarily, and Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission president, has already indicated that sooner membership of the Ukraine in the European Union is on the table. I mean, she talked about 2030, but I'm sure it will be earlier. Anyway, so I mean, look, when you are when you're traveling in Ukraine, you think the Ukraine is an agricultural superpower. But we know now that it's not only an agricultural superpower, but Trump's predatory attitude, toward the natural resources, the minerals and everything in the Ukraine, gives you an indication that Ukraine is not only an agricultural superpower, but has also all kinds of resources that both sides, Putin as well as Trump, want. So the Ukraine is not simply an adjunct. It's not simply an emotional. No, it's a very powerful place. And I mentioned that before, when you travel in, as I did in 2017 in the Ukraine, you admire the spiritedness, the political attitude, that you feel there.
Timothy Snyder said the same thing in one of his pieces recently. He's so impressed with
Yes.
Ukraine.
No,
the
it's
trains
stunning.
run on time in Ukraine. There are very few places in Europe where the trains run on time, but Ukraine
That's
is
right.
one of them.
Yes.
Let me go to Gene, and we're going to have to do our final comments here because we're out of time. But Gene, all of this, all that we've been talking about, reflects, in my mind anyway, a change in the world order. It's like Yalta, where Putin wants Europe, Trump wants this continent, and Xi wants Asia. And it seems to be migrating that way. But in any event, it seems clear from what we've said is that the world order, the liberal world order after World War II is changing dramatically, maybe more quickly than ever. Your thoughts?
It is. It has already in the United States. It's taking place here. We can look to the United States to see what could happen in Europe. On the other hand, Europe now has a choice. And Zelensky has a very weak hand, even though Ukraine is stronger than it was before the war, because it has demonstrated what it can do with its army and how it can mobilize its people It's not only an economic powerhouse and the largest country in Europe, aside from Russia, but Russia is Eurasian, of course, but it is strategically located, and it has a strong desire to be free and to be aligned with the West and with Europe. Now, whether or not this can happen at a time when Putin is weak and Trump is strong and is giving strength to Putin rather than leveraging his power to create a deal for Ukraine, we don't know. He wants Europe to go it alone financially. He wants to bring money back to the United States. Trump is all about money and deals and improving his situation vis-a-vis other countries. And he's sitting atop the greatest amount of power in the world. So it depends. The fulcrum is actually here, even though the action is in Europe. And Ukraine is geographically situated in a very important space, because as we know, Putin has tried to aggrandize territory to the south in Syria, Iran, Moldova, Georgia, Montenegro, and the southern tier of the European Union is weak. And it has a tendency, like Turkey, to play both sides. So the northern tier of Europe is where the strength is, and the fulcrum is Germany. We have to watch and see, how is Germany and the European Union going to handle Trump, and where are Trump's fortunes going to go? Are the American people going to be able to mitigate what Trump is attempting to do in overturning, reversing the government in the United States? Can he do the same thing in Europe, which is obviously what he wants to do?
So let me go to you, Manfred, for your final comments. Take a minute, if you don't mind, and tell us to what extent you agree with Jean.
I'm not as pessimistic about Germany and Europe, and I'm not that pessimistic about the United States in one sense also. I think, Trump will face threats within the next 4 months in his own country when the red states begin, to fight back against all of the cuts that really affect them. And when the farmers begin to realize, what it means to their survival. So the United States is fluid at this point too. It is not only the fluidity, of Europe. I think the power game in the United States has not really begun. It's a waiting game, and for that reason, the world order has not completely collapsed. And don't forget, Putin is not the leader of a very strong economy or strong country as a whole.
I really agree. And let me say that I would also say that Germany somehow is at the center of the future of Europe. And the future of Europe is very important to the US. So you guys are great. Thank you for exploring all these issues. It's been a great discussion. Jean Rosenfeld, independent scholar, Manfred Henningsen, political philosophy, UH Manoa. I'm Jay Fidell, host of Keeping the World Company, and we've been discussing the results and implications of the recent German elections. Thank you very much to both of you. Thanks to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha.